My mother's voice cut through the community center's chatter like a blade, declaring to Mrs. Delaney that I, Evelyn Harper, was too self-absorbed with her little events to deserve a birthday party. At 35, I stood at the edge of the Asheville, North Carolina, gathering, the sting of her words sharper than the scent of cornbread and collard greens wafting from the potluck tables. The room, a historic wooden hall nestled in our mountain town, was festooned with pink and blue streamers for my sister Lauren's baby shower, a cruel replacement for the quiet celebration I'd planned at our family's Victorian home, centered on my grandfather's leather-bound recipe book, a cherished relic of potluck traditions that once united our community. My mother, Margaret Harper, stood at the center of it all, her silver hair gleaming as she toasted Lauren's new chapter, her smile a polished mask that hid the lie she'd just told. My father, Henry, lingered by the dessert table, rearranging cookies with a distracted air, his eyes avoiding mine, his silence as heavy as ever. I'd poured years into my work as a community event planner, organizing Asheville's festivals and fundraisers, often dipping into my savings to cover family bills while Lauren chased her dreams, art school, a lavish wedding, now this baby. Yet here I was, erased from my own 35th birthday, the day commandeered for Lauren's moment in the spotlight. The crowd, neighbors, church friends, the potluck committee, fawned over my sister, her white dress glowing as she cradled her belly, every laugh a reminder of my invisibility. Mrs. Delaney, our kind but gullible neighbor, caught my eye with a pitying smile, her earlier whisper to another guest echoing in my mind, "Margaret says Evelyn's always stirring trouble." The words burned, unearthing a memory of my mother's voice from years ago. "Evelyn, you're so practical. Lauren needs us more practical." That's what they called my sacrifices, working overtime, skipping my own dreams to keep the family afloat. As I moved toward the refreshment table, my fingers brushed my phone in my pocket, where a hidden group email sat, one I'd found weeks ago on my mother's old laptop. She thought she'd deleted it, but there it was, a thread where she called me disruptive, urging neighbors like Mrs. Delaney and Mr. Carver not to invite me to Lauren's shower, claiming I'd ruin it. "Evelyn's always been difficult. Let's keep this about Lauren," it read. My pulse quickened, the weight of that betrayal settling like a stone in my chest. I glanced at Mr. Carver, our gruff neighbor known for his peach cobbler, who stood near the door, his brow furrowed as he watched Margaret charm the room. Had he seen the email too? His refusal to meet my gaze hinted at something, guilt, maybe, or knowledge of a deeper secret. The recipe book, my grandfather's legacy, was supposed to be the heart of my birthday, a symbol of the community's love and my place in it. I'd spent weeks planning to share his recipes, to reclaim a piece of myself. Now, it sat untouched at home, its pages a silent witness to this betrayal. My mother's lie to Mrs. Delaney wasn't just a slight, it was a calculated move to erase me, to paint me as the problem while Lauren shone. I thought of my grandfather, his warm voice saying, "Evelyn, this book keeps us together. It's yours one day." That promise had anchored me through years of being sidelined, but now it felt like a taunt. My fingers hovered over my phone, the email a spark ready to ignite. I could project it on the community center screen, let the town see Margaret's words, let them question the perfect Harper family. But as I watched Lauren laugh softly, unaware of the storm brewing, and my father's shoulders slump under the weight of his silence, a pang of doubt hit me. Could I unravel my family in front of the community that raised us? The question gnawed, but so did the fire in my chest, the need to be seen, to reclaim what was mine. I took a breath, my resolve hardening. This wasn't just about a birthday. It was about years of being pushed aside, and I was done staying quiet. What would you do if your own family buried you like this, right in front of the town you loved? The sting of my mother's words at the community center lingered like smoke, curling around the memory of my grandfather's kitchen, where the scent of his cornbread once filled the air. I stood in my small event planning office in Asheville, the leather-bound recipe book open on my desk, its pages worn from years of use. My fingers traced his handwriting, each recipe a tether to a time when I wasn't the overlooked daughter. At 15, I'd chopped onions beside him, his voice steady as he said, "Evelyn, this book is our family's heart. It'll be yours one day." That promise had carried me through years of quiet sacrifices, working overtime to cover my parents' bills, skipping my own dreams to prop up Lauren's. But now, the betrayal from the baby shower, my mother's email calling me disruptive, burned hotter than ever. It wasn't just my birthday they'd stolen. It was my place in the family. I closed the book, my mind drifting to a moment 2 years ago, when I'd found a crumpled note in my father's desk drawer at the Victorian house. Scrawled in his hurried script, it read, "Trust transfer, Lauren. Meet Reed." I dismissed it then, thinking it was about some minor family matter. Now, it felt like a clue to something darker. My mother's email, uncovered on her old laptop, hadn't just slandered me to the neighbors, it hinted at a financial maneuver tied to my grandfather's trust, meant for me but redirected to my sister. The words replayed in my head, let's keep this about Lauren. Had they orchestrated this for years, painting me as the problem to justify their choices? The thought made my chest tighten, a mix of rage and grief for the family I thought I knew. My office, tucked above a bookstore on Asheville's Main Street, was my sanctuary, its walls lined with photos of potlucks I'd organized, smiling faces, tables groaning with dishes from my grandfather's recipes. Those events had been my way of honoring him, of proving my worth to a town that adored my mother's charm and Lauren's glow. But the community center's dismissal of my birthday, orchestrated by my mother, felt like a public erasure. I recalled a potluck 3 years ago, when Lauren had accidentally spilled wine on my carefully planned seating chart, her apology too quick, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. My mother had laughed it off, saying, "Lauren's just clumsy, Evelyn. Don't make a fuss." I'd swallowed my anger, as always, but now I saw it for what it was, a pattern of sidelining me, of making Lauren the star while I faded into the background. I opened my laptop, the email thread staring back at me. It wasn't just my mother's words that cut, it was the neighbors' replies, Mrs. Delaney agreeing to keep me out, Mr. Carver's curt, "I'll think about it." His hesitation stood out. Mr. Carver, with his gruff demeanor and legendary peach cobbler, had always been kind to me, slipping me extra servings at potlucks when my parents weren't looking. Had he known something about the trust? His refusal to fully endorse my mother's plan suggested he might hold a piece of the puzzle. I thought of confronting him, but the risk stopped me cold. If I pushed too hard, I could alienate the few allies I had left in this tight-knit town. The recipe book lay heavy on my desk, its pages a map of my grandfather's love, now tainted by my family's betrayal. I remembered a summer when Lauren and I, barely teens, had helped him bake pies for the potluck, our hands sticky with blackberry juice, our laughter echoing. That memory clashed with the present, Lauren's radiant smile at the shower, my mother's calculated lies, my father's silence. The trust, meant to secure my future, was a lifeline my grandfather had left me. Had they really stolen it to prop up Lauren's perfect life? The question gnawed, but so did another. If I dug deeper, would I lose the family I still loved? I leaned back, my gaze fixed on the book. Its worn cover felt like a challenge, urging me to uncover the truth. What would you do if the legacy you cherished was built on a lie? My phone buzzed, a message from Mrs. Delaney. "Evelyn, I feel awful about the shower. Can we talk?" Her guilt was palpable, even through text. I'd always seen her as an extension of the family, her peach preserves a staple in my grandfather's recipes. Had she been manipulated too, or was she complicit? I typed a careful reply, inviting her to my office tomorrow. If she knew something, anything, about the trust or my mother's plans, I'd find out. My skills as an event planner, honed from years of reading rooms and managing crises, would serve me now. I'd watch her body language, listen for hesitations, piece together the truth. But as I set the phone down, a memory surfaced. My father, years ago, tucking a check into Lauren's hand for art supplies, his eyes sliding past me. The trust transfer note, Marcus Reed's name, it all pointed to a secret bigger than a birthday. I wasn't just fighting for recognition, I was fighting for what was mine. The office was quiet, the hum of Asheville's evening traffic faint outside. I thought of the potluck tradition, how it had once been my grandfather's gift to the town, a symbol of unity. Now, it felt like a battleground. My mother's email had weaponized the community against me, but the community could be my strength too. I recalled Mr. Carver's furrowed brow at the shower, his reluctance to join the crowd's adoration of Lauren. He'd been at every potluck, his cobbler a ritual, yet he'd stood apart. If he knew about the trust, about the note, he could be the key. But approaching him meant risking exposure, stirring the town's gossip mill before I was ready. I closed my laptop, the email's words etched in my mind. My mother's manipulation, my father's complicity, Lauren's complicity, they'd built a narrative that cast me as the outsider. But I wasn't the disruptive one, they were. The recipe book, with its faded ink and dog-eared pages, was proof of my place, my grandfather's belief in me. I wouldn't let them rewrite that story. As I locked the office, a plan began to form, not a reckless outburst, but a calculated move, using the potluck stage to turn their lies against them. The community had seen me as the dependable daughter, the one who made their events shine. Could I make them see the truth? The weight of that choice settled over me, heavy as the mountain air. I was ready to fight, but at what cost? The weight of my mother's email and my father's cryptic note pressed against me as I sat in my office, the recipe book's worn leather a silent accusation on my desk. I couldn't shake the image of Lauren's smug smile at the community center, or the way my mother had dismissed my hurt with a flick of her wrist. But it was Mr. Carver's hesitation at the baby's shower, his furrowed brow, his curt response. In the email thread, that gnawed at me most. He knew something, and I needed to find out what. My fingers tapped the desk, my event planner's instinct kicking in, piecing together the puzzle of my family's betrayal. I'd spent years reading rooms, spotting tension in a glance, and now I saw it in Mr. Carver's reluctance to join my mother's chorus of praise for Lauren. He was my way in. I drove to his small clapboard house on the edge of Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains looming like silent witnesses. Mr. Carver answered the door, his flannel shirt rumpled, his eyes wary but softening when he saw me. "Evelyn," he said, stepping aside, "I figured you'd come." The living room smelled of coffee and old books, a stark contrast to the polished charm of my mother's Victorian home. He gestured to a worn couch, but I stayed standing, my gaze fixed on a folder he clutched, its edges frayed like my nerves. "You didn't agree with my mother's email," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Why?" He sighed, setting the folder on the coffee table. "Your mother came to me 3 years ago with a petition to transfer your grandfather's trust to Lauren. Said it was his wish, that the recipe book proved he wanted her to carry on the family legacy." He opened the folder, revealing a single sheet of paper, the ink sharp and angular, nothing like my grandfather's careful scrawl. "This is the signature she claimed was his." I refused to witness it. "It's a forgery, Evelyn." My breath caught, the room tilting as I stared at the document. The trust, meant to secure my future, had been stolen with a lie, and my mother had used my grandfather's beloved recipe book to justify it. The betrayal sliced deeper than I expected, not just for the money but for the desecration of his memory. I remembered his hands, rough from years of gardening, guiding mine as we mixed cornbread batter, his voice warm with pride. "You're the one who gets it, Evelyn," he'd said. Now, my mother had twisted that love into a weapon, claiming Lauren was his true heir. Mr. Carver's voice pulled me back. "I stayed quiet because your mother runs this town's social scene. Crossing her means losing my place here. But I couldn't sign that lie." His eyes met mine, heavy with guilt. "I should have told you sooner." I took the document, my fingers trembling but my mind racing. This wasn't just about a birthday or an email, it was fraud, a calculated move to erase me from my grandfather's legacy. I thought of the potlucks, how my mother had rallied the community to see Lauren as the golden child, using the recipe book as a prop to sell her story. But why? What was she protecting? I recalled my father's note, trust transfer, Lauren. Meet Reed. Was there more to this than just favoritism? Mr. Carver leaned forward, his voice low. "I know a lawyer, Rachel Monroe. She's sharp, doesn't back down. She can help you fight this." The mention of a lawyer sparked something in me, a path to justice, not just revenge. But as I clutched the forged petition, a memory surfaced, my mother at a potluck years ago, her arm around Lauren, saying, "She's our future." I'd smiled then, swallowing my hurt, believing we were a team. Now, I saw the truth. I'd been a means to an end, my sacrifices funding their lies. The recipe book, sitting in my car, felt heavier than ever, its pages a map of my loss. Could I use it, and the community's love for it, to expose my mother? The idea was intoxicating, but it came with a cost. Taking this to court meant tearing apart the family image my grandfather had built, the one I'd spent years upholding through my events. I looked at Mr. Carver, his weathered face a mirror of my own resolve. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me after all this time?" He hesitated, then pulled a small photo from his wallet, a faded image of him and my grandfather at a potluck, laughing over a shared pie. "Your grandfather was my friend," he said. "He'd hate what they've done to you." His words hit like a wave, stirring a grief I hadn't let myself feel. The community had been my grandfather's pride, and I'd poured my heart into keeping it alive. Now, it could be my weapon, or my undoing. As I left his house, the petition tucked under my arm, I felt the weight of my next move. My mother's manipulation ran deeper than I'd imagined, and my father's silence was no longer just indifference, it was complicity. I thought of Lauren, her laughter at the shower, and wondered if she knew about the forgery. Was she a pawn or a player? The question burned, but so did my determination. I'd spent years making Asheville's events shine, reading people's motives, turning chaos into order. Those skills would serve me now. What would you do if the legacy you loved was stolen by the people you trusted most? I drove back to my office, the mountains casting long shadows, my mind already mapping the potluck where I'd turn their lies against them. The forged petition Mr. Carver handed me burned in my hands, its ink lay a jagged cut through my grandfather's legacy. I sat across from Rachel Monroe in a dimly lit Asheville diner, the clink of coffee mugs a faint backdrop to the storm in my chest. My mother's manipulation, my father's silence, and Lauren's complicity had already unraveled so much, but the name Marcus Reed, scrawled on my father's note, haunted me. Rachel, sharp-eyed and unflinching, slid a manila envelope across the table, her voice low. I traced the trust transfer. It's not just about Lauren getting your grandfather's money. Your father used the trust as collateral for a $100,000 loan from Marcus Reed, a developer with a reputation for shady deals. My breath stopped, the diner's warmth turning cold. The trust, meant for me, wasn't just stolen, it was a shield for my father's secret debt. I thought back to a potluck 2 summers ago at the community center, my father pacing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. I'd overheard him mutter "Reed" to my mother, her quick hush cutting him off as her eyes flicked to me. I'd assumed it was about some minor business, not a betrayal that gutted my future. Now, it clicked, my father's late nights, his distracted sighs. The way he'd slip checks to Lauren for expenses, while I covered the family's bills. The trust's transfer to my sister wasn't about her baby or my grandfather's wishes, it was a cover to clean up my father's mess. Rachel leaned forward, her gaze steady. Reed's tied to half the new condos in Asheville. Your father's debt funded a bad investment, and they used Lauren's perfect life to make the transfer look legitimate. The revelation was a punch, not just for the money but for the years I'd spent believing my father's silence was mere indifference. I'd worked overtime as an event planner, pouring my savings into the Victorian house's repairs, while he'd gambled my inheritance on a deal with a man like Reed. My mother's email, painting me as disruptive, was a distraction, a way to keep the community's eyes on Lauren's glow instead of their lies. I gripped the envelope, my fingers tracing the edge of a bank statement Rachel had included. It showed the trust's funds funneled through an account in Lauren's name, but the withdrawals matched my father's loan payments. My sister, radiant at the shower, wasn't just a beneficiary, she was a front. I thought of confronting my father, storming into the house and demanding answers, but my planner's instinct stopped me. I'd spent years orchestrating Asheville's events, reading crowds, turning chaos into order. This needed precision, not rage. Rachel's voice cut through my thoughts. We can build a case for fraud, but we need more, proof of intent, witnesses. The community trusts your family, Evelyn. We have to break that trust carefully. Her words echoed Mr. Carver's warning about my mother's influence. The potluck tradition, my grandfather's legacy, was my leverage, but using it meant risking the community's love. I pictured the recipe book, its pages filled with his careful handwriting, now a symbol of everything they'd twisted. A memory flashed, Lauren, years ago, hovering in the kitchen as I planned a potluck, her smile too bright as she offered to help with the budget. Later, I'd found discrepancies, small sums missing, brushed off as errors. Had she known about the trust then, or was she just my mother's pawn? The thought of her complicity hurt, stirring memories of us as kids, sneaking blackberries from my grandfather's garden, her laughter soft and unguarded. But that Lauren felt gone, replaced by the woman who'd let my mother erase me. I looked at Rachel, my voice steady despite the ache. What's next? She slid another paper across, a contact for a private investigator. Dig into Reed's deals. If we tie him to your father, we can prove the trust was misused. As I left the diner, the envelope tucked under my arm, I felt the weight of my choice. Exposing my father meant dismantling the family image I'd upheld through every festival, every potluck. I thought of Mrs. Delaney, her guilty text offering to talk. Could she know about Reed or the debt? Her role in the potluck committee made her a fixture in my mother's orbit, but her remorse suggested she might break ranks. I recalled a moment at the last potluck, my father slipping out early, his face pale as he glanced at his phone. Had Reed been pressing him even then? The community center, with its wooden beams and warm lights, loomed in my mind as the perfect stage to unravel their secrets, but at what cost? I drove through Asheville's quiet streets, the mountains a dark silhouette against the sky. My mother's charm had always swayed the town, but I'd built my own reputation, crafting events that brought people together. Could I turn that trust against her? The recipe book, waiting in my office, felt like a weapon now, its recipes a reminder of the community I could rally. But as I pictured my father's slumped shoulders, Lauren's nervous glances, a pang of doubt hit. What would you do if the family you loved had a betrayal this deep? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my resolve hardening. The potluck was coming, and with it, my chance to make them face the truth, no matter who it broke. The bank statement from Rachel, linking my father's debt to Marcus Reed and my grandfather's trust, sat heavy in my bag as I arranged tables in the Asheville Community Center for the upcoming potluck. My mother's lies, my father's secret, and Lauren's role as their front had already carved a deep wound, but I wasn't ready for the next blow. Mrs. Delaney, her face flushed and eyes darting, approached me as I adjusted a centerpiece. Her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn, I did something terrible, she said, clutching a jar of her peach preserves, a staple in my grandfather's recipes. Your mother made me spread rumors about you, said you were unstable, that you'd ruin the potluck if you took charge. She threatened to cut me from the committee if I didn't. Her confession hit like a slap, the betrayal of a woman I'd seen as family twisting the knife deeper. I froze, my hands gripping the tablecloth, the memory of Mrs. Delaney's pitying smile at Lauren's baby shower flashing back. She'd been part of my mother's campaign to paint me as the problem, whispering lies to neighbors who trusted her word. My voice stayed calm, my event planner's instinct kicking in to mask the storm inside. Why tell me now? I asked, my eyes locked on hers, searching for cracks in her guilt. She looked down, her fingers tightening around the jar. I saw the recipe book at your office last week. It reminded me of your grandfather, how he trusted you. I can't live with this anymore. I'll testify if you need me to. Her offer was a lifeline, but it came with a sting, another piece of my grandfather's legacy tainted by my mother's manipulation. I thought of the potlucks, how I'd spent years perfecting every detail, seating charts, dish assignments, music, to honor his memory. Mrs. Delaney had been there, her preserves a crowd favorite, yet she'd let my mother weaponize her influence against me. The community center, with its warm wooden beams, felt like a trap now, a stage where my mother had orchestrated my erasure. I recalled a moment from last year's potluck, when I'd overheard Mrs. Delaney whispering to another neighbor, Evelyn's too controlling, always changing things. I'd brushed it off, blaming my own intensity, but now I saw it, my mother's words in her mouth, a calculated move to dim my light. My fingers brushed my phone, where the email thread, my mother's plea to exclude me, still burned. Mrs. Delaney's confession was proof the lies went beyond a single message. I handed her a napkin, a small gesture to steady her trembling hands, but my mind was racing. Her testimony could bolster Rachel's case, tying my mother's manipulation to the trust theft. But it also meant exposing the community's complicity, people I'd served for years through my events. I pictured my grandfather, his laugh. As he served cornbread, his belief in this town. Would he want me to tear it apart to reclaim what was mine? Mrs. Delaney's voice broke my thoughts. Your mother said it was for Lauren's future, that you'd understand. I believed her. Her words echoed Lauren's role as the golden child, propped up by lies I'd funded with my own sacrifices, years of paying family bills while my dreams waited. A memory surfaced, my mother, at a church supper, praising Lauren's artistic spirit while I refilled platters, my efforts unnoticed. I'd thought it was just favoritism, but now I saw the deeper game, using Lauren to hide my father's debt, the forged trust, the whole charade. Mrs. Delaney's guilt gave me leverage, but it also hurt. She'd been like an aunt, her kitchen. A second home where I'd learned to make biscuits from my grandfather's book. Her betrayal, even coerced, cut deep. I nodded, my voice low. I'll need you to tell Rachel everything, dates, conversations, what my mother said. She agreed, her eyes wet but resolute, handing me the jar of preserves as if it could mend what was broken. As she left, I stood alone in the community center, the tables half set for the potluck that would be my battlefield. My mother's influence. My father's secrets, Lauren's complicity, they'd built a lie that this town had swallowed. But Mrs. Delaney's confession shifted the ground. I thought of Lauren, her nervous glances at the shower, and wondered how much she knew. Was she just my mother's puppet, or had she chosen this role? The question gnawed, stirring a memory of us as girls, braiding each other's hair in the Victorian house, giggling over my grandfather's stories. That sister felt lost, replaced by someone who'd let me be erased. What would you do if the community you loved was built on a lie you helped create? I set the jar on a table, its label a reminder of the potluck's power in Asheville. My skills, reading people, planning events, turning chaos into order, would guide me now. I'd use the potluck to expose my mother's lies, but I needed more than Mrs. Delaney's words. Rachel's investigator was digging into Marcus Reed, and I had Lauren's old laptop, untouched since she'd left it at the house. If it held proof of her role, I could unravel the whole scheme. But as I locked the center's doors, the mountains looming outside, I felt the cost. Exposing them meant losing the family I'd fought for, the community I'd served. My grandfather's recipe book, waiting in my office, was my anchor, a promise I'd fight to keep, no matter who fell. Mrs. Delaney's confession in the community center, admitting she'd spread lies about my stability at my mother's behest, fueled my resolve. As I sat in Rachel Monroe's office, the air thick with the scent of coffee and old paper. The forged trust petition, my father's $100,000 debt to Marcus Reed, and the community's complicity had already cracked the facade of my family's perfect image, but I needed more to dismantle it. Rachel, her sharp eyes scanning a stack of documents, laid out a plan. We've got Mr. Carver's testimony on the forgery and Mrs. Delaney's statement about your mother's manipulation, she said, tapping a pen against her desk. But to win in court, we need to prove intent, show They deliberately targeted you to hide the debt and secure Lauren's future. My chest tightened, the weight of exposing my family clashing with the flicker of love I still held for them. I nodded, my event planner's mind mapping the pieces, each lie, each betrayal, like tables at a potluck. Rachel slid a notepad toward me, her handwriting crisp. We need evidence from Lauren's laptop, something tying her to the trust or your mother's schemes. And we need to dig deeper into Marcus Reed's role. I thought of the laptop, still in my office, its secrets. Locked behind a password I hadn't cracked. Lauren had left it at the Victorian house months ago, claiming it was broken, but I'd seen her typing on it late at night, her face lit by the screen's glow. Was she hiding something, or was she just another pawn in my mother's game? The question stung, stirring a memory of us as teens, sharing secrets under the oak tree in our backyard, her laughter bright before envy took root. Rachel's office, tucked in a quiet corner of Asheville, felt like a war room, its walls lined with law books that promised justice but demanded sacrifice. I recalled a potluck from years ago, when I'd caught my mother whispering to Lauren about keeping the family first, her eyes darting to me as I carried trays. I'd thought it was about the event, but now I saw it as a thread in their web, spun to keep me out. I'll get into the laptop, I said, my voice steady despite the ache. And I'll talk to Mrs. Delaney again, she might know more about Reed. Rachel nodded, her expression unyielding. Be careful, Evelyn. Your mother's influence runs deep. If she suspects you're building a case, she'll rally the town against you. The warning echoed as I drove to my office, the mountains casting long shadows over Asheville's streets. My mother's charm had always swayed the community, her voice a melody that masked her control. I'd spent years building trust through my events, turning chaos into connection, but now I'd use those skills to unravel her lies. At my desk, I powered on Lauren's laptop, its screen flickering to life. The password prompt stared back. But a memory sparked, Lauren's habit of using our grandfather's birthday for everything. I typed it in, and the desktop opened, revealing a folder labeled Family. My pulse quickened as I clicked, finding a series of emails between Lauren and my mother, dated months before the trust transfer. One line stopped me cold, Evelyn. Can't know about Reed's loan. Make sure the trust looks like it's for you. My sister wasn't just complicit, she'd helped orchestrate the cover-up, the betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Not just for the trust but for the sister I'd once adored. I remembered her tears when our grandfather died, how we'd held each other, promising to honor his legacy. Now, her words on the screen mocked that bond. But another email caught my eye, one from Lauren to my mother, her tone hesitant. I don't want to hurt Evelyn, but you said this is the only way. My heart sank. Lauren wasn't the mastermind, she was trapped, just as I'd been. My mother's manipulation had ensnared us both, pitting us against each other to protect my father's secrets. I saved the emails to a drive, my hand steady but my mind reeling. This was the proof Rachel needed, but using it meant exposing Lauren, maybe breaking her. I met Mrs. Delaney at her cozy kitchen the next day, the scent of baking bread a stark contrast to the tension between us. She fidgeted, her apron dusted with flour, as I asked about Reed. Your mother mentioned him once, she said, her voice low. Said he was helping with family investments, but she got nervous when I asked more. I think she knew I was skeptical. Her words confirmed Reed's shadow over my family, but her guilt offered a way forward. I'll tell the court. Everything, she said, her eyes meeting mine. Your grandfather would have wanted you to have the trust. Her support was a bomb, but it came with a cost. Turning the community against my mother meant risking the potluck tradition, the heart of Asheville's unity. As I left her house, the recipe book in my bag felt like a talisman, its pages a reminder of what I was fighting for. I pictured the community center, its tables soon to be filled with dishes from my grandfather's recipes, and saw my chance. The potluck would be my stage, not to confront but to plant seeds of doubt, to let the town see my mother's cracks. But as I thought of Lauren's email, her reluctant complicity, a pang of doubt hit. Could I destroy my sister to reclaim my legacy? What would you do if the truth you sought meant tearing apart the only family you had left? I drove on, the mountains looming, my resolve hardening. The court date was coming, and with Rachel's help, I'd make them face the truth, no matter the cost. The emails on Lauren's laptop, exposing her role in hiding my father's debt to Marcus Reed, burned in my mind as I stood in my office, the recipe book open to my grandfather's cornbread recipe, its familiar script a stark contrast to my family's lies. Rachel's plan for the lawsuit was taking shape, bolstered by Mrs. Delaney's promise to testify and Mr. Carver's evidence of the forged trust petition, but I needed more to seal the case. Late at night, with Asheville streets quiet outside, I dug deeper into Lauren's laptop, my fingers hesitating over the keys. A hidden file caught my eye, a digital journal, tucked away in a folder labeled Notes. I opened it, and my breath caught. In her own words, Lauren admitted to sabotaging my potlucks out of jealousy, detailing how she'd accidentally misdirected vendors and skewed budgets to make me look incompetent. But the real shock was her confession: my mother had orchestrated it, whispering that my success threatened Lauren's place in the community. My heart sank, the words blurring on the screen. Lauren wrote, "I didn't want to hurt Evelyn, but Mom said she'd take everything, Grandpa's legacy, the town's love, if I didn't act." The journal was a goldmine for Rachel's case, proof of my mother's manipulation and Lauren's complicity, but it also shattered the last thread of hope I held for my sister. I remembered a potluck 4 years ago, when I'd found my carefully planned dessert table in disarray, Lauren's quick apology masking a smirk. I'd blamed myself, thinking I'd overlooked details, but now I saw her intent, guided by my mother's hand. The recipe book, its pages worn from my grandfather's love, felt like a betrayal of its own, his trust in me stolen, his memory twisted to prop up Lauren. I saved the journal to a drive, my hand steady but my mind reeling. This wasn't just about the trust or my father's debt, it was a deliberate campaign to erase me from the community I'd served. My mother's charm, her ability to sway Asheville's tight-knit circle, had turned my sacrifices, years of funding family expenses, planning flawless events, into a narrative of my failure. I thought of confronting Lauren, demanding why she'd let jealousy poison our bond, but my planner's instinct stopped me. I'd spent years reading people's motives, orchestrating moments that brought them together. Now, I'd use that skill to unravel my family's lies, not with an outburst, but with precision. The potluck, just days away, would be my opening move. I met Rachel at her office the next morning, the journal's contents weighing heavy as I handed her the drive. Her eyes lit up as she read, her voice sharp with focus. "This is intent, Evelyn. Lauren's words show your mother manipulated her to undermine you, tying it to the trust theft. We can use this in court." She leaned back, her gaze piercing. "But you need to decide how far you're willing to go. This will expose Lauren, maybe ruin her in this town." The warning hit hard. I pictured Lauren at the baby shower, her hands cradling her belly, her smile a mix of pride and nerves. Was she a villain or a victim? The journal suggested both, her jealousy real but stoked by my mother's control. I nodded, my voice low. "Do what you need to. I want the truth out." As I left Rachel's office, the mountains loomed over Asheville, their steady presence a reminder of what I was fighting for. The community center, where I'd poured my heart into every event, was my grandfather's legacy as much as the recipe book. But using Lauren's journal meant tearing apart the family image he'd cherished. A memory flashed, Lauren and I as kids, sneaking bites of his blackberry pie, giggling as he pretended not to notice. That sister felt like a ghost now, replaced by someone who'd sabotaged me to please my mother. Yet her words, "I didn't want to hurt Evelyn," hinted at regret, a crack in her complicity. Could I save her, or was she too far gone? I walked to the Victorian house, needing to see the place where my grandfather's recipes had come to life. The kitchen, with its faded wallpaper and creaky floors, held memories of us cooking together, his stories weaving through the steam of simmering pots. My mother was there, arranging flowers, her smile practiced as she glanced at me. "Evelyn, you're early for the potluck planning," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. I kept my face neutral, my planner's mask in place. "Just checking the setup," I replied, my voice calm despite the journal's weight in my bag. She didn't know I'd seen her lies, didn't know I held proof of her manipulation. But her casual dismissal, as if I were just the help, fueled my resolve. As I left, I passed my father in the hallway, his shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding mine. I wondered if he knew about Lauren's journal, if he'd seen her struggle under my mother's control. The potluck was my chance to shift the narrative, to let the community see the truth without destroying it. I'd bring my grandfather's recipes, serve them with a smile, and plant questions in the town's mind, subtle, sharp, undeniable. What would you do if the family you loved built their legacy on your ruin? I clutched the recipe book, its pages my anchor, and walked into the night, ready to turn their lies into my weapon. The community center buzzed with the warmth of Asheville's annual potluck, the air thick with the scent of my grandfather's recipes, cornbread, blackberry pie, dishes I'd perfected over years of planning. Lauren's journal, exposing her sabotage of my events under my mother's direction, sat on a drive in my bag, alongside Rachel's legal papers tying my father's debt to the stolen trust. I moved through the crowd, my smile practiced, my event planner's instinct sharp as I set out plates and greeted neighbors. My mother stood by the dessert table, her laughter a calculated melody, while my father lingered near the door, his eyes scanning the room like a man expecting a storm. Lauren, glowing with her pregnancy, chatted with Mrs. Delaney, unaware of the journal's damning words or the testimony I'd secured. Tonight, I'd plant the seeds of truth, not with a confrontation but with a calculated move to shift the Town's loyalty. I approached the microphone, my heart steady despite the weight of my plan. Thank you all for coming, I said, my voice clear, carrying over the chatter. This potluck honors my grandfather's legacy, his recipes that brought us together. I paused, my eyes sweeping the room, catching Mr. Carver's nod and Mrs. Delaney's nervous glance. But legacies can be twisted, promises broken. Sometimes, the truth is buried under the dishes we share. The crowd stirred, whispers rippling. As my mother's smile faltered, her hand tightening on a glass. I held her gaze, my words a blade wrapped in warmth. I found something recently, a journal that shows how far some will go to protect their own, even at another's expense. Lauren froze, her face paling, and I knew she suspected what I'd uncovered. The room grew quiet, the weight of my words sinking in. I didn't name names, not yet, but the implication hung heavy. My mother stepped forward, her voice sharp. Evelyn, this isn't the place for personal matters. Her attempt to control the narrative was predictable, but I was ready. It's exactly the place, I said, my tone calm but unyielding. This community deserves honesty, just as my grandfather intended. I pulled the recipe book from my bag, holding it up. He left this to me, along with his trust, but some chose to rewrite his wishes. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Mr. Carver's eyes met mine, his earlier warning about my mother's influence echoing. Mrs. Delaney shifted, her guilt a silent ally as she clutched her apron. A memory flashed, my grandfather at this very event years ago, his arm around me as he praised my knack for bringing people together. Now, I was using that skill to tear down the lies my family had built. Lauren approached, her voice trembling. Evelyn, please, don't do this here. Her plea was genuine, but the journal's words, her sabotage, her jealousy, burned too brightly. You had a choice, I said softly, my eyes locked on hers. You chose to hurt me. The crowd parted, neighbors whispering, their trust in my mother's charm cracking. My father stood silent, his face a mask of resignation, as if he'd known this moment was coming since he'd signed away my future to Marcus Reed. I stepped back, letting the moment linger, my planner's instinct guiding me to leave the crowd. Hungry for answers. Rachel had warned me to tread carefully, to save the hard evidence for court, but this was my opening salvo, a public seed of doubt that would bloom when the lawsuit hit. I thought of the journal, its confession of Lauren's sabotage, and the emails tying her to my mother's schemes. They were enough to sway a judge, but here, I needed the community's heart. I placed the recipe book on the table, its worn cover a silent challenge. This book isn't just recipes, I said, my voice carrying. It's trust, family, truth. What would you do if someone stole that from you? The question hung, a spark meant to ignite whispers that would spread through Asheville like wildfire. As I moved through the crowd, serving plates with a steady hand, I caught my mother's glare, her control slipping as neighbors avoided her eyes. Mrs. Delaney approached, her voice low. I told a few people about your mother's pressure on me. They're listening, Evelyn. Her support was a quiet victory, but it came with a pang. The potluck, my grandfather's pride, was now a battlefield, its warmth tainted by the truth I'd exposed. I thought of Lauren's journal, her reluctant complicity, and wondered if she'd break under the pressure of the coming court date. My father's silence, his debt to Reed, loomed larger than ever, a shadow over the family he'd failed to protect. I left the center as the event wound down, the mountains dark against the sky. The recipe book, tucked back in my bag, felt heavier, its pages a reminder of what I'd lost and what I'd fight to reclaim. My mother's lies, my father's betrayal, Lauren's sabotage, they'd underestimated me, thinking I'd stay silent to preserve the family name. But I'd spent years reading rooms, turning chaos into order, and now I'd turn their deception into my strength. The court date loomed, and with Rachel's case, Mr. Carver's testimony, and Mrs. Delaney's support, I was ready. But as I drove through Asheville's quiet streets, a question lingered. Could I win justice without losing the last fragments of the family I'd once loved? The Asheville courtroom was stark, its wooden benches filled with neighbors whose whispers fell silent as I stood beside Rachel Monroe, the recipe book tucked in my bag like a silent witness. The potluck had shaken the town's trust in my mother's charm, and now, with Mr. Carver's testimony on the forged trust petition, Mrs. Delaney's account of coerced lies, and Lauren's journal exposing her sabotage, we had a case that could reclaim my grandfather's legacy. But Rachel's final piece of evidence was a blade I hadn't expected. She presented a ledger from the potluck's charity fund, showing $20,000 siphoned off through Lauren's account, with my mother's initials on the transfers. The room gasped as Rachel turned to the judge. They blamed Evelyn, painted her as reckless, to cover their theft. My mother's face hardened, my father's shoulders slumped, and Lauren's eyes widened, her hands trembling on the stand. I kept my gaze steady, my event planner's calm masking the storm inside. The ledger was a shock, but it fit the pattern, my family's lies always cloaked in my sacrifice. I remembered a potluck years ago, when I'd noticed missing funds and questioned Lauren, only for my mother to dismiss it as my overzealous bookkeeping. Now, I saw the truth. They'd used the community's trust in me to hide their theft, pinning it on my name to keep Lauren's image pristine. Rachel's voice cut through my thoughts. Evelyn's family orchestrated a fraud, using the trust to cover Henry Harper's $100,000 debt to Marcus Reed and siphoning charity funds to maintain their facade. She placed the ledger before the judge, its numbers a cold indictment. My mother stood, her voice sharp but cracking. Evelyn's always been jealous, twisting our efforts to protect the family. Her words were a final grasp at control, but the crowd's murmurs turned against her, fueled by the seeds I'd planted at the potluck. Mr. Carver's testimony had exposed her forgery, Mrs. Delaney's words had revealed her manipulation, and Lauren's journal had shown her sabotage. The judge's gavel loomed, but the real blow came when Lauren took the stand, her voice barely audible. "I took the money," she said, tears streaming. "Mom said it was to save our place in the community, that Evelyn would ruin us. I was scared of losing everything." Her confession, raw and desperate, confirmed my mother's grip but shattered the sister I'd once known. The courtroom blurred as memories flooded, Lauren and I as kids, sharing my grandfather's pie, her laughter bright before jealousy and my mother's whispers took hold. Her admission was a double-edged sword. It damned my family but showed Lauren as a pawn, not a mastermind. My father remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor, his complicity in the debt to Rita weight he couldn't shed. The judge's ruling came swiftly, the trust was restored to me, the charity funds ordered repaid, and my mother faced charges for fraud. The gavel struck, and the room erupted in whispers, but I felt no triumph, only a hollow clarity. My family's lies had unraveled, but the cost was the bond I'd fought to preserve. As I left the courthouse, the mountains stood silent, their permanence a contrast to the family I'd lost. I walked to my office, the recipe book in hand, its pages a reminder of my grandfather's trust in me. I'd won back his legacy, but the Victorian house, the potlucks, the community I'd served, they'd never feel the same. My mother's charm, my father's silence, Lauren's betrayal, they'd built a life on my sacrifices, and I'd torn it down with the truth. What would you do if your family's love was a lie you paid for? I'd answered that question, but the victory was cold. Looking back, I see every step, my mother's calculated words, my father's hidden debt, Lauren's journal, the potlucks. Turning point, as a map of betrayal I navigated with precision. The lesson isn't forgiveness or vengeance, it's that family can be the sharpest weapon, cutting deepest when you trust it most. For those facing similar betrayals, know this, your worth isn't tied to their lies. You don't owe them your silence or your sacrifice. Claim your truth, not with rage, but with the quiet strength of someone who's seen the game and chosen to rewrite the rules. To anyone carrying that weight, I say, stand firm, speak clear, and let the truth be your legacy. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the next series, where others find their strength in the shadows of betrayal.